All right, welcome back, guys. So in this video, we're now gonna finally talk about how to enter a transcendental mental state. I've actually decided to combine the next two sections in the book. Excuse me. I decided to combine the next two sections in the book in this video. Exactly like this first point says, so very simple, right? The technique, the grand magical technique for entering a transcendental state using your conscious mind is simply to hold an intention for about 7 to 10 seconds. That's it, right? So it's very simple. It's a very simple technique, very simple process. It took me years to realize that this was all I was doing to enter a transcendental state. Because I was doing it for years, but I never quite knew what was exactly it was. I thought I did at times, but I kept having trouble controlling it and controlling my ability to enter the state. Right? And so as I studied the state for years and years and years, I realized that this was all that I was doing, right? So now I don't know why that works, right? So actually, to go over this next point, the act of holding an intention seems to exert some kind of pressure on the subconscious that accumulates and peaks right around the 7 to 10 second mark. So I don't know why this works per se, right? So I only know that it does, right? So I'm not really sure. So this is more of an axiomatic proposition. So basically it's just a given assertion without evidence. Well, the evidence is in practicing it, but I'm not necessarily sure why it works. It just does, right? So and you can practice this. You can start practicing this now, right? So if you hold an intention, pick any intention, if you hold it for about 7 to 10 seconds, right? At first, it's going to feel like nothing's happening, right? So it always feels like, what's the point in me doing this? Nothing seems to be happening. There's no purpose to this. However, just keep holding the intention. Right around 7 to 10 seconds, you're going to notice something happening, right? And what you're going to notice is that it's going to feel like your conscious mind is trying to enter a dream state. It's trying to enter almost like a daydream, which that daydream state is exactly what we've been calling a transcendental mental state or a trance state, right? So when you hold it, keep holding for 7 to 10 seconds, you're going to notice your mind entering a trance state. And what you have to do is what I call in the book. I don't know if I use that term yet in these videos in the book, but you have to do a process that I call acquiescence, right? So acquiescence is basically when you sort of let go, or the conscious mind lets go and allows itself to just enter a dream state. So for example, when you're going to sleep, right? When you're going to sleep, you can't like watch yourself sleep or try to control the process too much while you're sleeping. Excuse me. Now, in that case, your body's doing most of the work in terms of taking away your ground state, so you naturally enter a dream state. However, you still have to your conscious mind has to let go of control, right? It has to relax itself and just let itself drift into the daydream. That's exactly the process for entering a transcendental mental state, right? You have to sort of, I think we talk about this again later in the chapter, but you have to sort of, when you hold an intention for 7 to 10 seconds, right around the 7 to 10 second mark, you're going to feel your mind trying to enter a daydream, right? And so you have to allow it to just enter the daydream. Let go, sort of relax your mind, and you're going to notice you want to just sort of go with the flow of the daydream. What that flow is actually your subconscious compelling you, right? So you want to go with the flow of the compulsion. So it's very similar to what we talked about with laughing. So when your conscious mind charges your subconscious at the laughter frequency, right? Your subconscious will compel you to laugh. Now you don't have to laugh. The negative mind can hold back the laughter, but if it lets go and just allows it, you allow yourself to laugh, right? Then you will go with the flow of the compulsion that's coming from your subconscious, and that gives you transcendental control, or the ability to laugh, right? Which is a form of transcendental control. So this is the same principle. When you hold intention for 7 to 10 seconds, your subconscious will switch to some frequency based on that intention, which we're actually going to talk about in this third point, but then it'll start compelling you to daydream or use transcendental imagination based on that intention. And if you let go or acquiesce to that compulsion, right, and just kind of go with the flow of it and follow it, you're just going to start daydreaming. And so, actually, before I go over this third point, this kind of gets back into exactly what I was saying about about ground states, about an atom, right? So an atom is in its ground state, the most stable state, so it requires the least amount of effort to stay in that state. When it gains energy, when an electron in the atom gains energy, the electron enters an excited state, right? So it jumps in energy level, right? And then when that's less stable, so it has a harder time staying in that state, right? But as it loses that energy, generally emitted as light, the electron will fall back into its ground state. So that's exactly what happens with the subconscious. When you hold an intention, which is almost like absorbing electromagnetic energy, your subconscious, the act of holding an intention exerts a kind of pressure on your subconscious, which almost, in a sense, gives it energy. And as it gains energy, it jumps into its excited state where it's much more free. So it's not behaving according to the way the body's primarily telling it to behave. Now it's behaving according to the way the mind tells it to behave, which is a much more free state for the subconscious. Now, it stays there for a little while, and then eventually it goes back to its ground state, which we're actually going to talk about that in this last point. But yeah, as you can see, that analogy works pretty well for how the subconscious mind works. Now, when you hold an intention for 7 to 10 seconds, right, what your subconscious actually does and what it compels you to do when it's in its excited state. So when it's in its excited state, your awareness is in a transcendental state. So you're in a daydream. You feel like you're in a daydream-like state. But what it's actually compelling you to do will be dependent on the intention you held, right? So actually, let me just read this whole thing off. So the intention you hold will determine how your subconscious compels you while in a transcendental state. And I put in parentheses, that's principle of quantization. So this whole time, right, the whole curriculum, right, we've been talking about how your subconscious is quantized by your intention, right, and by the frequency of the frequency your subconscious has switched to, right? So that entire quantization, this is actually where it comes into place. So the intention you actually hold to enter a transcendental state is going to determine what your subconscious does while you're in a transcendental state, or while your subconscious is in its excited state, right? So that, and again, that's the entire thing we've been talking about in terms of quantization. It's quantized, in other words, by the intention you hold. Now, when you're in a transcendental state and your subconscious is in an excited state, right, you can still produce intentions. You still produce all types of intentions from the conscious mind. But here it's very interesting because you're going to notice when you do this, right, that your subconscious isn't necessarily responding to your intentions in the same way it did before, right? And so when your subconscious is in its ground state, it responds almost instantaneously to your intentions. So for example, if you hold the intention to imagine an apple, right? So that's the example we gave before, you'll imagine it instantly. If I hold the intention to just picture an apple in my mind, I'll picture it instantly, right? That's a negative mind ability. That comes from the subconscious functioning according to its ground state, which is mostly just from commands coming from my physical body, which is really from my brain, right? And the way the brain charges the subconscious in its ground state, it does it in a way where it responds to the conscious mind's commands so instantaneously, right, and so quickly that it virtually seems like the conscious mind is just doing it itself, but it isn't, right? The subconscious is still responding. If I want to imagine an apple, my subconscious is still compelling my conscious mind to alter my perception to perceive an apple. And that's how I end up imagining an apple in my mind. But all of that's happening, there's a kind of syncopation, right, between the intention and subconscious activity when it's in the ground state. And that's really as a result of the way your brain is charging your subconscious. So it makes it a very seamless and easy and quick, instantaneous process, which is a good thing, right? Excuse me. However, when you hold an intention for 7 to 10 seconds and your subconscious enters its excited state, then that syncopation's gone, right? So your subconscious still is responding, but it's not as instantaneous, right? So you're going to notice when you hold an intention for 7 to 10 seconds and you enter a transcendental state, what you're going to be daydreaming is based on the intention you held for 7 to 10 seconds. Now, once you're in that daydream and you try to produce a whole new intention, you're going to notice your imagination doesn't respond as quickly or as easily. And you've probably noticed this in a dream. So if you're in a dream, let's say you've become lucid in a dream and you start thinking stuff, you're going to notice the dream doesn't just instantaneously respond and change according to your thoughts. It does eventually change according to your thoughts. Some things that you expect in a dream can happen, but it's not like when I just imagine an apple in my head, or I choose to imagine a car or whatever. I can do all those things instantly, very quickly. But in a dream, you'll notice a dream doesn't just respond instantaneously to your thoughts like that. So the syncopation between your intention or some command from the conscious mind and the subconscious response is now gone. It changes. It's not, your subconscious doesn't respond to your thoughts instantaneously like before. So the main point where your subconscious is going to respond to your intention in terms of what it does when it's in an excited state and your conscious mind is in a transcendental state of awareness, the main point of that connection is going to be when you're holding an intention. So that's very important, right? So if I want my subconscious, let's say I want to charge, and I recommend to practice this with emotions, right? So emotions are the easiest type of subconscious charge to pull off. So pick an intention. Let's say you want to feel like you're having fun. Just hold the intention to feel like you're having fun. That's it. Now, it's a little more complicated than that because of the absolute nature of the subconscious. What you're really doing is you want to know which intentions you have to produce that God chose to match up with the fun frequency, right? So it's a little more complicated, and we'll talk more about that in chapter 11, because then we're going to talk about the nature of using stories, which is kind of what we talked about in chapter 7, right? So you have to use stories really to charge your subconscious properly. Your subconscious likes its commands in the form of stories. But for now, we'll just, to make it very simple, and say, just hold the intention to feel like you're having fun. That's it. Hold that very simple intention for about 7 to 10 seconds. And then right around 7 to 10 seconds, you're going to notice your mind trying to enter a daydream. You're going to start thinking random thoughts. Your mind's going to kind of drift a little bit. And then you're going to enter a daydream and start thinking about random things. But the compulsions you feel, right? The emotion you feel in the types of thoughts that come to your mind, the compulsions that you're going to feel to, like, the urges you're going to feel. So in the last video we said your subconscious will compel you in a transcendental state to think and do certain things and feel certain things, right? So that's going to manifest itself in the daydream, or what you're imagining in the daydream. And the things you're going to feel the urge to think and do and feel are going to be related to the frequency or the emotion or feeling of having fun, which is exactly what your intention expressed. So you can practice that, right? Just keep practicing. You could pick any emotion. So you could pick the emotion of having fun. You could pick the emotion of peace or inner peace. You could pick the emotion of feeling like you're in love, whatever. Or just feeling happy or feeling a sense of joy, right? Hold that intention for 7 to 10 seconds. And then as your mind starts to drift, acquiesce to that feeling. So allow your mind to drift. Just enter a daydream and start thinking random things. But you're going to notice that it's very easy to think random things that have to do with the intention you hold, and specifically the frequency of that intention. So that's very important. Now the last thing I want to talk about transcendental states, which is also very important. It took me years to realize this too, is that transcendental states are always intermittent, right? So they only last for a few seconds at a time. So I remember for years when I first started studying this stuff, I kept thinking that I could stay in a transcendental state continuously, right? Because when you're in the zone, it actually feels like it's continuous, but it isn't, right? It just feels that way to the conscious mind. And I didn't notice these things at the time. I didn't know what to look for. So when I kept entering the transcendental state, I knew what a transcendental state was, and I knew I needed to enter that state to charge my subconscious, but I couldn't stay in it, right? No matter what I did, I could not stay in that state. And I kept thinking that I was doing something wrong, right? That I lost it. I used to think that it was almost like a train track in a way. I used to think that because like I said, you have to acquiesce to your subconscious compulsion, which is what I did. So I would acquiesce to the compulsion whenever I felt it. And in my mind, I used to think it was like I was catching like a train track, or I was starting to get on track. And then when I fall out of a transcendental state, I felt like I lost it, like I got off the tracks. I used to think I was thinking I wasn't acquiescing enough, right? So I was thinking too forcefully, and that caused me to lose track of it. But no matter what I did or how hard I tried or whatever technique I thought of, right? I used to think of many different techniques and experiments and things like that. I never was able to stay in a transcendental state. I couldn't. I always lost it after just a few seconds. But I used to tell myself, but I know it's possible to stay in it because I do whenever I'm in the zone, right? But I didn't know how to get in the zone that much at the time, because that was like the last thing I learned how to do with the subconscious, which we're going to talk about how to do that in chapter 13. And as you can see, that theory is much more theory involved than even what we've been talking about here to pull that off. So I was always thinking, but if I'm able to stay in the zone or able to stay in the transcendental state, then it must be possible. To be fair, it actually never occurred to me that it might possibly be the case that you just can't stay in it for a long time. I don't know why. I guess implicitly because of my experience when I was in the zone, it just never occurred to me that was the case. But it wasn't until later, I'm trying to remember the exact time. It's such a blur because I was studying the subconscious every day for years, right? But there was a moment, I'm trying to remember the exact moment that I realized that transcendental states were intermittent. Oh, I think I do. That was when I was, I think I remember now. That was when, no, that's when I realized about negative memory, which we're going to talk about in the next video. Anyway, it's not important. Now, I don't remember the exact moment I came up with this idea. I'd have to think about it a little bit. But eventually, I figured out that transcendental states were intermittent by definition, right? There was nothing I could do to stay in it because I couldn't stay in it, and you're not allowed to. There's some rule or some property about them that makes it so you can only stay in it for a few seconds at a time. And there's nothing you can do to change that or get around it. So then I realized, once I finally understood that, I was like, oh, right, so that's why I can't stay in it. And then I started trying to control my subconscious and understand my subconscious from this perspective. And then I understood way more about the subconscious. And so this is important, right? So when you hold the intention for 7 to 10 seconds to enter a transcendental state, and you acquiesce to your compulsions and you enter a daydream state, you're only going to be able to stay in it for a couple seconds. Now, it's tough to tell time in that state, right? Because believe it or not, your body's actually the one that helps your conscious mind to be aware of the passage of time, right? I think it has to do with your, what's it called? Circadian rhythm, something like that, right? Circadian rhythm. But your body compels your subconscious in a way that helps you to notice the passage of time. Now, so that's part of your ground state. Now, when your subconscious isn't in its ground state, it's harder to notice the passage of time because you're not paying attention to it. Remember the attention principle. You can't think about something without first drawing some of your attention to it first. And in your subconscious free state, it doesn't naturally just notice or pay any attention to time. So that's why when you're dreaming, the passage of time feels very distorted. And it feels the same way here when you enter a transcendental state. So it's hard to tell time, but if I had to guess, I'd say about 3 to 4 seconds. Now, remember what I said before too, when you first enter a transcendental state, it's very subtle. So that's why it's good to practice this. So you should get practice, hold an intention. For example, pick some emotion and hold the intention to just feel that emotion. That's it, right? Hold it for 7 to 10 seconds. And right around 7 to 10 seconds, you're going to feel your conscious mind trying to enter a daydream. So allow yourself to get lost in some daydream, lost in some story or whatever that you just make up. And what you're going to notice is that when you're first doing it, it's very subtle and it's hard to notice your conscious mind trying to do that. But if you know about all this theory, right, you're going to be able to catch it, right? So you're going to notice it and then allow yourself to catch it. It's, again, very subtle, very weak. But as your subconscious charges up more and more and more, which we're going to talk about later, but basically if you keep doing this process, your subconscious is going to charge, right? And you're going to notice as it charges more and more and more, it's going to be way easier to notice when this is happening, when your conscious mind is trying to enter that transcendental state, because the compulsion is going to be way stronger because your subconscious is charged more. So at the beginning of the charge, it's very subtle, difficult to notice. So practice this, and you're going to see what's happening, and you're going to notice it, and you're going to get experience with it, and you're going to get better at the acquiescence process, right? And you get better at noticing or catching when your subconscious is compelling your conscious mind to try to enter a daydream. And again, as you keep doing it, your subconscious will charge up, but we'll talk about that later. But also, when your subconscious does charge, I feel like I'm able to stay in a transcendental state for maybe a second or two longer. It's hard to tell because it's hard to tell time in that state, but I think you can stay in the transcendental state a little longer after your subconscious charges up, and you might enter the state a little bit quicker than 7 to 10 seconds when your subconscious charges up, right? So your subconscious has much more of affinity for its excited state, or your conscious mind will have more affinity for a transcendental state when your subconscious is charged up. However, before it reaches that charged up state, then it doesn't want to enter a transcendental state that much, or doesn't want to enter excited state that much, which also means your conscious mind isn't going to enter a transcendental state that easily. So that, and it's very, even when you do, it's very subtle and it's very weak, right? The compulsion is not strong, so its compulsion is weak. So it's important to be aware of it at the beginning and acquiesce to it at the beginning, which is hard to do if you don't know this theory, right? Which is why a lot of people miss it, right? They don't even realize what's happening. Now, when you're actually no, we'll talk about entertainment a little later. So we talk, I think in this section, this chapter, we also have a section on entertainment, right? But I'll just say very quickly for now, when you're watching movies or listening to music, you actually do this without even realizing, right? You'll hold an intention based on what you're observing for 7 to 10 seconds, and then you enter a transcendental state or a daydream-like state based on what you're observing. So yeah, in the next section, I don't remember this chapter that well. I don't remember at least the breakdown of the sections. I'm trying to remember. Oh, the next section we talk about subconscious action and instinct. Yeah, so that's important too. I'm trying to remember what I talk about after that though. Oh, I talk about how the subconscious charges, and then we talk about entertainment theory from that perspective. All right, so that's pretty much it for this video. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about the analog of intention. So just as your conscious mind produces intention has a structure in terms of subject and command, your subconscious also has its own thoughts, and we're going to talk more about how that works related to the subconscious charging process. Right? So yeah, that's it for now, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.